I'd like to call up my amendment. Lee number 17 is modified.
Go ahead, Senator Lee.
While the COVID-19 pandemic has drastically increased e-commerce sales, the surge of online goods has exposed some problems, some systemic problems with our supply chain, introducing truck shortages, port capacity, and technology, as well as port labor challenges. Americans in all states, and not just in the coastal ones, are experiencing consumer product shortages. And the end doesn't really appear to be anywhere nearly in sight. Businesses, particularly small ones, are feeling the supply chain crunch. Unfortunately, to continue to serve their customers and employ their workforce, they've had no other choice but to increase consumer prices, further contributing to our broader inflationary pressures. I introduced a bill called the Stop the Grinch Act late last year and recently introduced an updated version of it called the Ship It Act in order to provide temporary relief measures to ease pressures experienced by carriers, ports, truckers, rail lines, and others along the supply chain, ultimately affecting consumers. I appreciate the Chair's willingness and that of Senator Wicker to work with me to incorporate some of these reforms into the bill, which we've done. But I think we can still do more, and that's why I'm offering this amendment today. Lee Amendment 17 is modified, which would provide additional space for the overflow storage of cargo containers. If you can forget the images of vessels anchored off our coast, just waiting to unload. One reason the wait is so long is because we don't have enough dock space to place the containers. To make matters worse, if the containers aren't sitting on the ship or at the shipyard, they're sitting on our previous supply on our precious but sometimes dwindling supply of truck chassis, which are so desperately needed for the transportation of goods throughout the country. So my amendment requires that the GSA, the Secretaries of Agriculture, Interior, Transportation, and Defense jointly consult major stakeholders in our supply chain, ocean carriers, ports, railroads, and truckers, to identify and temporarily designate plots of federal land that we can use to store empty containers for no more than a year. Because this authority is for such a short period of time and for such a unique emergency purpose, my amendment creates a categorical exclusion from NEPA. But I want to be clear. The locations of these lands are in the discretion of the agency heads and consistent with the Council on Environmental Quality's NEPA regulations, meaning that if a designation is determined to have extraordinary circumstances that warrant the preparation of environmental documents, then the agency head must do so, not only may, but must do so in accordance with NEPA. This is not a blanket waiver of NEPA. It's only a presumptive one that can be waived easily. This overflow storage will provide a much-needed temporary relief valve to offload containers and help free up dock space so that we can unload our ships and have more efficient thoroughfare of cargo. Some projections note that our supply chain crisis could go on for another 12 to 18 months. Congress really should act now. It must act now to provide common sense measures like that found in my amendment. Lee Amendment 17 is modified to help mitigate the worst of our supply chain crisis for the benefit of all Americans. I'm proud to have the support of the Association of Port Authorities on this amendment, and I ask for the support of each of my colleagues, and I'd like a roll call vote on this.
Thank you, Senator Lee. I certainly support securing more space for our ports. I think one of the issues that we found is that the pop-up space that the Biden-Harris administration just announced through Secretary Vilsack is a very positive solution. I think this amendment, though, misses the mark in a couple of ways. The amendment would require federal agencies to identify federal lands within 14 days, which certainly bypasses a thoughtful review. The amendment would also fail to allow public-private partnerships, which is the success, really, of the Biden-Harris pop-up ports issue, including the pop-up port that was just announced last week in Seattle, which I participated with many of our growers from the state on what a positive solution that was, because you're pre-positioning the product very, very close The problem is the ships are leaving, they're giving farmers very little notice, so they have to be pre-positioned very close at hand. Our hay, our apple, our potato farmers, our dairy producers have struggled with the narrow and unpredictable shipping windows and the U.S. impact of having their product left at the port. So the pop-up solution, very close to the port in pre-positioning, proximity to the major export terminal, has been a very positive step. I've heard from farmers that the benefit of the pop-up is also the fact that it's so close to the export terminal. This amendment looks to direct the administration to establish container storage sites 150 miles away. Part of the issue is that they're saying we need to be close at hand. I'm also concerned that bypassing important security and safety laws that keep our ports and port workers' safety under the Maritime Transportation Security Act, workforce and equipment are needed to make these pop-up ports functional, and it is unlikely that the railroads have access to the federal land, which would be explored under this amendment. Containers would be needed to be moved by the port to the temporary facility and back by truck. I can tell you right now, this committee has got to get our mind around what we're going to do to increase trucking capacity. We don't have enough drivers. We have congestions on our streets and highways. That's why I'm so happy we passed our major port infrastructure investment, because we got to improve all of this. You know, I believe in the trade economy, but we have to improve our infrastructure if we're going to get our products to and from. So the amendment would direct multiple federal agencies to explore potential containers on federal lands. I believe would irresponsibly allow for the categorical exclusion of NEPA, exposing environment and fisheries and recreation to potential hazards, and potentially in areas where we don't want to see this development. So let's continue on the smart innovation solutions that the pop-up ports the Biden-Harris administration has established, and get this product closer to the export containers so that they can leave our docks in a timely fashion. I oppose the amendment.
Madam Chair.
Senator Wicker.
I support the amendment, and I think the senator from Utah would say we already have these temporary pop-up facilities in Savannah and Oakland, and now we understand from my distinguished friend in the state of Washington. This amendment simply directs the agencies to work together to look at additional temporary container overflow storage areas, and I cannot understand why this wouldn't be agreed to by a voice vote. So I will vote yes.
Further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.